So thank you, conference. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And I'd like to introduce on stage somebody who's become very close to SEDEX, somebody who I've got a huge amount of time for and respect. Dr. Sally Uren, OBE, and it's the first time apparently in public that's been used, so congratulations to you, Sally, who is the CEO of Forum for the Future. Her mission to accelerate a big shift towards some of these issues around sustainability. I'm not going to speak for her, but can I just tell you what a transformational person she is, and we at SEDEX have really benefited recently from the work she's doing, both here at SEDEX, but also the work she's done with Unilever, Kingfisher, and the CNA Foundation. On stage for you, Sally Uren.
Thank you. It is the first time I've seen it. It's quite exciting. It means nothing, that OBE business, if you're not from within the UK. Anyway, let's not dwell on that. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let's try that one again. Good morning. Good morning. That's better. Just checking you're all still awake. Delighted to be here and was really thrilled to get the invitation to come along. What I wanted to do today, great, that works, was just to actually pick up some of the themes you've already heard described in the previous two commentaries, but to really look out to the future, to think about what are these trends that are shaping global supply chains, and then critically to think about, well, what does that actually mean? How do we make sense of these changes, and how do we think through what a future resilient, future-proofed, and I'm really aware of the jargon alerts that we've been given too, so I'm going to have to really watch myself, but future-proof is okay, it's kind of, resilience okay, I think. So what are the attributes of those supply chains that are really going to sustain us into the future? And then also, equally critically, how do we go about constructing them? And I will pick up on that theme of the real importance in this messy, complicated world in which we live to really start to think quite differently. So that's my order for this morning, 25 minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Tom in a moment from Walmart. So first of all, Jonathan introduced Forum. Some of you I know will be very familiar with us, so apologies if you've heard this before. We are a sustainable development non-profit. We began here in the UK 21 years ago. Our mission is to do nothing less than accelerate a big shift towards a sustainable future by transforming whole systems. And you'll hear the word system from me a lot in the next 25 minutes, because that's our focus at Forum. We don't think it's enough to drive incremental change. We don't think it is enough to fiddle with bits of the world around us. We need to really understand, how do we create a food system that's fit for the future, an energy system that's fit for the future? And so our approach very much is taking that systems perspective, more of that later. And we do that from 4 offices, not just here in London, but also in Mumbai, Singapore, and New York. We're 70 people all in, so not that many of us, but we've got big ambition. We work in 2 main ways. We have partnerships with many of the organizations in the audience here today, where we really try and accelerate their progress towards sustainable development. And then increasingly, and this is increasingly more of the work that we do, is we bring those organizations together, often around supply chain challenges. These challenges are just too big for one organization to tackle alone. And we form these pre-competitive, multi-stakeholder collaborations. What a nerdle soup that is. But they're real, they exist, and they're really important for addressing some of these complex challenges. And right now we have one looking at how do we make a sustainable global tea industry, how do we mainstream sustainable cotton. And it's through these collaborations that we're really getting to understand, how do we create these global supply chains of the future. So first of all, when we think about the future, we need to reflect on 2 things. That trends tend to impact different levels of any system. So this is the first exposure into this whole world of systems thinking. And it's important because when we think about trends, we tend to think of them as linear factors that are affecting the world around us. But the truth is they, of course, affect the world in different ways. And people often say to me, well, what do you mean by a system? And a system is the room that we're in today. It could be an organization, it could be the global food system, it could be the global economy. But any system tends to operate at 3 levels. You have the top level of the system, that landscape level, where the big macroeconomic, big societal changes play out. And these kind of trends are trends that we just need to adapt to because they are slow moving, they're hard to change course. Climate change is a great example of a landscape level trend. You then have the middle part of any system, which is kind of where we all spend our time. This is the day-to-day, what's called the regime of a system. And this is where we think about trends. We need to really integrate these trends into our day-to-day business operations. And then you have the fun bit of any system, the niche. And this is where innovations can bubble up, can die, but actually some of them can bubble up so they hit the regime, and actually day-to-day business tends to change. And when we think about these trends, they offer us huge opportunities for thinking about doing things differently. So when we're thinking about trends, it's really important that they impact these different levels of a system, and our response to the trends, therefore, does tend to be different. And of course, trends don't act in isolation. And Jonathan touched a moment ago on automation. And when we think about automation, we need to understand actually it's very linked into livelihoods, into digital. This is an extract from a piece of work we did with UNICEF in Southeast Asia, where we've been helping them on their next 10-year strategy. And we picked clusters of trends that we think are really important for the economic development and therefore impact on children in that region. And automation and livelihoods and economic inequality are just 3 trends that could interact in very different ways. There's one scenario where automation it's going to happen, but it happens in a way in which the policy framework means that actually jobs are secured where they need to be secured, there's other access to income, that digital is actually used to ensure access to microfinance, access to healthcare, and actually there's a scenario where structural inequalities get better. Equally, we know there's a scenario where we have rapid automation, it isn't planned in any way, that digital only offers access to finance for the very few, and in that scenario, structural inequalities get even worse. And so when we're thinking about trends, we do need to understand how they interact, and that's why at Forum we tend to use scenarios a lot as a way of understanding these trends. And no better example of how these trends interact. Anyone tell me what's on the right-hand side of this slide? You're all in supply chains, someone must know. Micro? Yes, thank you very much. Found in 83% of tap water samples from 14 countries around the world in September of last year. So we've known about the plastics in our oceans, we've known that plastics is a big environmental issue, Jonathan just touched on that. But what's increasingly clear, it's also a health issue. It's in our tap water. We don't yet know what the impacts on our health are from plastics in our tap water. But clearly we weren't designed to drink plastic as humans. So there are bound to be some. And the point here is that these trends are all interacting, which means responding to them does require us to understand that system. So at a landscape level, I'm not going to dwell on this. Jonathan's covered this very ably. If we think about those big landscape level trends, we would summarize the current picture as warning lights and beacons of hope. This analysis comes from a report we published just 3 weeks ago called The Future of Sustainability. Do download it, it's on our Future Centre site. And effectively, the warning lights are there, so we know environmental stress is intensifying. After 3 years of flat global carbon emissions, 2017 saw global emissions rise, and we know that we're seeing increasing political divisions. Yet, the energy system is rapidly transforming. Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, is about to build a city powered on renewable energy. So there are reasons to be cheerful, but probably not too many. But that's the general backdrop of that landscape level change. But looking to the regime where you all spend your time, where we all spend our time, this day-to-day business as usual, it's safe to say, and this is forum lingo, multiple areas of dynamism. There's a lot going on. just translated that for broadcast. So what are those multiple areas of dynamism? In our report, we pick out 7. I'm going to pick out 5 that I think are really interesting for supply chains. And I've added a 6 based on what's just happened in the last month, and I'll come on to that. Plastics. I included this not because we're not familiar with the issues, but because it's an area that is super dynamic, if such a thing exists. If you think about the rapidity of our response to this issue, if you look at the signals for change, legislation emerging around the world to ban the use of single-use plastics, big corporates like Sky committing to remove all single-use plastics from not just its own operations, but its supply chain by 2020. And so it begs the question, what does a plastic-free supply chain look like? I mean, plastic was invented for a reason. It has utility. But the pressure, particularly on single-use plastics, is only going to intensify. And I think we have the makings of a really significant system shift here, because we have heightened public awareness, we have data that's telling us plastics getting into the food we eat and the water we drink, and we're seeing legislation. So I think for all of you in the audience, just understanding plastic use through your supply chain, if you don't yet have a handle on that, I would recommend you do that soon. Number 2, something we call citizen innovation, which is effectively enabled by digital technology. Individuals being empowered to vote for what they want to, what they believe in, to form active communities online. And this offers huge opportunities for brands to communicate and so forth. And the signals of change we see here is that we're seeing online communities come together, such as guilds, unions, such as the US Tech Workers Coalition. And the plastic story broke here in the UK first because of a viral campaign run by some really agitated mothers who suddenly got to find out about microbeads. And that led to the legislation change here in the UK. So the power in our system is diffusing, it's coming to us as individuals. But we know that actually in this space of citizen innovation, we're seeing the emergence of the alt-right, of these extremist groups powered by digital technology. And we also know in some parts of the world, freedom of expression is becoming even more limited and the ability of NGOs to operate more constrained. And so the question here for all of you that manage supply chains is, what does this kaleidoscope of changing dynamics and individual empowerment mean for transparency? If you've got the answer, let me know, because I'm not quite sure what it is. But it's certainly a question that we need to think about and recognize that this individual enablement is all around us. Human rights, obviously. And this wasn't one of the areas we covered because we've covered it in previous years. It is very dynamic. And we kind of all know what we need to do. The reason I put it in is because whilst we've had the Modern Slavery Act here in the UK, which is meaning that we're having to make statements on how we're taking steps to secure the elimination of human rights violations and labour rights issue in supply chains, I am just struck by how in a month that conversation has become more evolved and the word safeguarding has emerged. And I say that very personally. I run a small non-profit. We had a very small grant from DFID a year ago to look at renewable energy provision in India. And we were asked, what's our safeguarding policy for the people in our supply chain? The truth is, it's not something we've thought too much about because we're not in direct aid relief. I'm not going to make a comment on the source of that story. My point here is that the bar is raising the whole time. And if us as a small NGO are asked what our procedures are, and we are going to develop a safeguarding policy, it's really important. We do a lot of workshops. We reach people throughout the world. Then that's just another reason why we need to have line of sight down our supply chains. Back to the third dynamic area we covered, and no surprise, shifting retail and consumption patterns. When we published the report, people in retail said, well, why? What's changed? This has been going on now for a few years. And the reason we included it is because I think retail is at a significant tipping point. We know that bricks and mortar retail are really struggling facing the onslaught of online, and some of our most dearest names in the high street are disappearing very quickly. That's not necessarily new news, but the speed at which that is happening is new. And also the fact that we're seeing are straight on the heels of Amazon Go in Seattle, where you can go and buy stuff without even having to speak to anybody. There's a similar store in Beijing. And so I think the retail system is on the brink of becoming something quite different. And I think that offers huge opportunities for brands who actually can maybe orchestrate the supply chains in new and different ways. And of course, as Jonathan mentioned, big implications for automation. So at the moment, online have had a reasonable story about job creation in warehouses, in logistics. But what happens to that story if those jobs are replaced by automation? And we're already seeing automation replace jobs in some parts of our supply chain. Which links to this other area of dynamism, the fact that we're seeing livelihoods shifting in low and middle income countries. Historically, the route to economic development in these countries has been through manufacturing, through agriculture. We're now seeing that actually the gig economy and rural depopulation is meaning that those routes are changing, and actually layer on automation. We really need to think, A, how are these goods and services going to be produced? Particularly in agriculture, people don't want to farm in the way that they used to. And B, what is our responsibility as custodians of global supply chains? Then the last area of dynamism, the one that I'm, as an ecologist, really excited about, is this proliferation of agricultural practices that are designed to put more back into the agricultural system than they take out. And regenerative agriculture, nothing new, so we know that it's great to be able to harness the soil as a carbon sink. It's one of the ways we might stay within 2 degrees of warming towards the end of the century. But we're seeing lots of more activity in this space, which if it scales, could actually deliver a sustainable ag system. I've just had my 5-minute warning, which is slightly alarming. So I'm going to have to either miss some stuff out or very quickly, I'm going to try and think hard about my key messages now. In terms of the niche, blockchain, we covered that this year because I think it has finally moved from the hype to the reality. Coupled with the Internet of Things, it's got extraordinarily huge potential to give us transparency through supply chain, and also actually transparency that is also enabling us to think about the ease of financial access. So there's a wonderful project about to be started in Malawi using blockchain technology to allow tea farmers easier access to finance through transparency. Is it the answer to sustainable supply chains? I don't think it's the answer on its own, because it is just a brilliant piece of technology. But coupled with the Internet of Things, coupled with the brain power that we all have, then it offers huge potential for sustainable supply chains. As does 3D printing. Again, something that's moved from, that all sounds really weird, to actually it's happening. I sit on an advisory board for a very large healthcare company. Can't tell you which one. But that promise of 3D printing technology for healthcare appliances, it's here. And there's a particular device that they're going to bring to market in May, manufactured through 3D printing, reduces energy consumption by 90% compared to the traditional forms of manufacturing, and waste by 99%. And so when we think about the layout of our global supply chains around the world, and the fixed assets that are within that, and the sheer scale of some of the manufacturing facilities, my guess is that will change very rapidly, and we'll have to think much more about flexible and adaptive supply chains. So implications, there's 2 parts to this, and I know I've only got about 2 seconds left, but it's really important. I wanted to give you implications in terms of the features of a really brilliant supply chain policy that allows you to respond to these future trends, and then how we might think differently about bringing that brilliant supply chain to life. The Sustainable Development Goals, they need to be the North Star, the guiding vision of your supply chain policy. You need, see how I'm speeding up here? Probably less palpitations now. Your supply chain policy needs to be constantly looking for opportunities to close that loop. How might you harness the circular economy? Because we are headed into a world where there will be no waste. Line of sight, we know that, getting ever more critical. Controversially, I think that certification may well have reached its limits and that actually it isn't enough to deliver sustainability, and actually we need to look way beyond certification to sustainable landscapes, to sustainable rural economies. Certification has been brilliant, but it's not enough to deliver sustainable development. And nor are the business models that predicate our supply chains. The business models that we're used to, they don't deliver enough equitable value capture at point of production. So how might we experiment with new business models that deliver an equitable and fair value capture at producer level? And then finally, in terms of that attribute, the what does your supply chain look like if you want to put more back into society and environment than you take out? What does it mean to be net positive? What does it mean to be slightly, not just slightly less bad, but actually putting more back than you take out? Instantly, when you ask that question, your supply chain ambitions suddenly go up a notch. And then the last piece of what I wanted to share was that change in thinking. The world is messy, it is complicated, everything is interrelated. Anything you do will have unintended consequences somewhere else, I can guarantee you that. And so that's why understanding that we operate in this messy system is really important. And that's why systems thinking is a way to make sense of all this dynamism. And this is where the focus shifts from the different parts of a system to how those parts are configured. Understanding what are the flows in the system, where does the power lie, what are our assumptions? And critically understanding that if we are going to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, which we absolutely have to, then we need to create systemic change. The world around us is just a record of our past decisions, our past actions. How do we make better decisions, new decisions, and actually create systems that are capable of delivering the Sustainable Development Goals? I would argue that's by harnessing what Jonathan was edging at, which is transformational change. So when you're thinking about the change you're creating in your supply chain, how can you shift from incremental to transformational change? And by transformational change, change that's catalytic. So in our cotton project, we're going to be launching soon a guide to sourcing sustainable cotton. That in itself, we hope, will drive further benefits down the supply chain. And that means for all of us, these 4 shifts, so understanding our system, thinking about systemic interventions. SEDEX is all about collaboration. That's why it's so brilliant you're all here today. And it totally is understanding that philanthropy isn't going to be the answer, and we need to create those enabling market mechanisms that allow sustainability to scale. And then one final thought, and I promise I will get off now, because it does, so I'm going to have to miss that. It does start with us. I would love you to take from what I've just shared with you that there are some incredibly powerful trends heading our way, and that they offer huge challenges, but they also offer huge opportunities to create new systems, to repattern the world around us, to really drive transformative change. If we're going to do that, we have to change ourselves too and become better systems thinkers and accept that actually no model is right. Some models are more useful than others, and actually change starts with us all. And in the audience today, we have how many? Hundreds of change makers. And grab that opportunity for transformational change, but grab it first internally. Thank you very much.